The Galactic Combat Academy's training hall fell silent as Forrest Reynolds caught the practice blade midair and immediately reversed his grip. Instructor Vex Thor, a towering Krellian with 4 arms and centuries of martial experience, stopped mid-demonstration. Cadet Reynolds, Vex Thor's translator, crackled with barely contained irritation. You will hold the blade as instructed. Edge outward, point forward, grip aligned with the forearm. This is the universal standard, perfected over 10,000 years across 47 civilizations. Forrest looked at the blade in his hand, then at his instructor, then back at the blade. Sir, with all due respect, you're holding it backwards. The other cadets, a mix of Talaxian, Vreen, and Korthan species, shifted uncomfortably. No one contradicted Instructor Vexthor. Not if they wanted to pass basic combat certification. Winnie Chun, the only other human in the cohort, closed her eyes and suppressed a groan. She'd known Forrest for exactly 3 weeks, and in that time, he'd already questioned the proper way to climb, the correct method of load distribution, and the standard approach to zero-gravity maneuvering. He'd been right every time, which somehow made it worse. Backwards, Vexthor repeated, his translated voice dripping with condescension. Cadet, I have trained warriors across this galaxy for 2 centuries. The grip I demonstrated is mathematically optimal for reach, leverage, and defensive capabilities. Your species has been spacefaring for less than a century. Perhaps you should observe before offering corrections. Forrest didn't back down. May I demonstrate, sir? The training hall's atmospheric regulators hummed in the tense silence. Finally, Vexthor gestured with 2 of his 4 arms. By all means, show us what humanity's 50 years of spaceflight have taught you about blade combat. Forrest stepped into the practice circle, blade reversed in what the Academy called an improper grip, edge toward himself, point back, like he was holding an ice pick. Vexthor activated a combat drone, setting it to level 2 difficulty. The drone circled, then struck. What happened next would be analyzed in Academy tactical databases for years to come. Forrest didn't slash or parry like the textbooks taught. He moved inward, inside the drone's reach, blade driving up and back in tight, vicious arcs. Each movement was economical, brutal, and utterly contrary to proper form. He used his free hand constantly, grabbing, redirecting, creating angles that shouldn't exist according to conventional doctrine. The blade became an extension of his body, not a tool held at arm's length. In 17 seconds, the drone was disabled, its core exposed by a strike that came from an angle its programming deemed impossible. Forrest reset his stance and looked at his instructor. Sir, the Academy teaches blade work as a primary weapon system. Humans developed knife fighting as a last resort weapon. When everything else failed, when it was too close, too desperate, too personal, we didn't optimize for reach. We optimized for survival when the enemy was already inside our guard. Vexthor's chromatic skin plates shifted through several colors, the Krellian equivalent of profound thought. Explain. The reverse grip isn't about optimal reach, Forrest continued, warming to his subject. It's about optimal damage when optimal reach has already failed. Your doctrine assumes controlled engagement ranges. Human doctrine assumes the fight has already gone wrong. Because most of our history, it did. Winnie found herself standing without meaning to. Instructor, if I may. Vexthor gestured consent. Humans didn't evolve as apex predators, sir. We were persistence hunters, yes, but we were also prey for a significant portion of our evolutionary history. The techniques Forrest is showing you, they weren't developed in academies or training halls. They were developed in alleyways, trenches, and close-quarters situations where the only rule was survival. She moved to join Forrest in the circle. May I partner demonstrate? What followed was a masterclass in human combat philosophy. Winnie and Forrest moved through scenarios the Academy considered compromised positions, grappled from behind, blade trapped, multiple angles of attack. Each time, the human approach was the same. Get closer, get inside the theoretical optimal range, and end it fast. You fight like you've already lost, observed Cadet Thrix, a Talaxian known for tactical insight. No, Winnie corrected, breathing hard. We fight like the situation has already degraded past the point where your techniques work. When the enemy is too close for proper blade work, we don't try to create distance. We make too close into a weapon. Vexthor was silent for a long moment. Then he did something unprecedented. He requested a demonstration of the improper grip himself. Forrest walked him through it, adjusting the instructor's primary right arm. It feels wrong because it is wrong for optimal conditions, sir. But combat isn't optimal, especially not for humans. We're weaker than most species, slower than many. Our natural weapons are practically non-existent. So we got very, very good at fighting when everything had already gone to hell. The instructor practiced the movements, his centuries of training warring with this new paradigm. This requires the user to accept vulnerability. It requires the user to acknowledge that they're already vulnerable, Forrest corrected gently. The Academy teaches you to maintain advantage. Humans learn to fight from disadvantage, because that's where we usually were. Over the following weeks, the Academy's curriculum began to evolve. They didn't abandon the traditional techniques. Those were still optimal for most species in most situations. But they added a new section, compromised position combat, human methodologies. Vexthor never admitted he'd been wrong. But he did start teaching with two grips, the traditional Academy style for optimal engagement, and what became known as the Reynolds reversal for when optimal had already failed. Winnie asked Forrest about it one evening in the observation deck, watching ships transit through the Academy's orbital space. You know, you made him look foolish in front of the entire cohort, right? Forrest shrugged. I didn't mean to. When you grow up learning that you're not the biggest or the strongest or the fastest, you get creative. And you get really honest about what happens when things go wrong. That's very human of you. That's my point. It is very human. The galaxy's been at peace for so long that combat became theoretical, academic. For us, it never stopped being personal. Desperate. Real. When he considered this, watching the stars. So what happens when the galaxy faces something that doesn't fight academically? When things go wrong on a galactic scale? Forrest smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Then they'll be glad humanity learned to fight backwards, inside out, and from underneath. Because that's where we do our best work. In the training hall below, Instructor Vexthor was teaching a new grip to a class of advanced cadets. He held the blade reversed, edge in, and his translator carried his words through the chamber. This is called the Reynolds reversal. You will learn it not because it is optimal, but because when you encounter a situation where optimal has failed, you will need to know how to fight like a human. And across the galaxy, humanity's reputation evolved, not as the strongest or fastest or most advanced, but as the species that had already figured out what to do when everything else went wrong.